Dr. Rahul, Assistant Professor at Manipal Center for European Study, and I welcome all of you to this final session of the day 3 of this winter school. As you know, the session is titled as EU-ASEAN Relations in the 21st Century. As we know that ASEAN and EU relations, it brings together two of the most advanced regional organizations, one supposedly supranational, the other strictly intergovernmental. Both have ambitious strategies for mutual engagement. In 2022, the signature of EU-ASEAN strategic partnership, and later on in 2021, the EU Vice President Joseph Borrell's first physical visit to Indonesia and the ASEAN headquarters, it underscored the European commitment to promoting regional multilateralism and bi-regional political security cooperation as a key feature of its Indo-Pacific agenda. With a shift in the center of gravity from west to east, and in the context of the redefined Indo-Pacific strategic space, it becomes imperative for us to understand how the relations between EU and ASEAN are shaping up. To talk more about on this topic today, we have with us Dr. Rahul Mishra. Dr. Rahul is a senior lecturer and coordinator of European Studies program at the Asia-Europe Institute at University of Malaysia. He's also the managing editor, AEI Insights, and associate Center for ASEAN Regionalism. Prior to this, he was a consultant with the Foreign Service Institute, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. A very warm welcome, Dr. Rahul. You have about an hour to interact with the student. After that, we will open the floor for question and answer. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Yatharth Kashyar, for that kind introduction. First of all, my apologies for the delay in attending, participating, and sharing my thoughts with the students and members of the audience on this very important topic of ASEAN-EU relationship, EU-ASEAN rather, because we'll be talking more about, discussing more about the EU, how EU looks at ASEAN, how EU approaches, engages Asia, and how this relationship has evolved. So first, my apologies, and second, I look forward to insightful comments and discussions from the students and members of the audience. So I think without further ado, we should just start straight away. I'm sure a lot has already been discussed on what EU is and how EU defines itself, what is EU's own identity. And the European Union's own identity shapes its relations with ASEAN, like any other factor in international relations, whether they are nation states or regional groupings. The nature of a particular state or a particular regional grouping defines its relationship with other regional groupings, other states, other actors. So European Union, being a regional organization, always looks at ASEAN as one. I think we can be very straightforward about it, as its type 2, team B, as it were, of European Union. A regional grouping that must, if you talk about 60s and 70s, a evolving regional grouping that must follow the European model. So this whole narrative of regional groupings shaping up across the world have to follow the European norm. This Eurocentric understanding of regional groupings has been a defining feature of ASEAN-EU relationship or EU-ASEAN relationship. This has dominated EU's approach to ASEAN, to other regional groupings for a long period of time. But ASEAN has come out of shadows of this narrative. Now ASEAN looks at itself as a case sui generis. If you talk to ASEANist, Professor Amita Acharya, for instance, or those who've been working in this field, they would say that ASEAN has its own mechanism. It has its own way of looking at regional cooperation, sub-regional cooperation, and also inter-regional cooperation. So that's why this ASEAN-EU relationship, I would say, is consistently evolving. And if you ask me for my first assessment of how EU-ASEAN relationship has evolved over past 60, 70 years, the first thing is this relationship is dynamic, not because both of them are engaging at multiple platforms. This relationship is dynamic because the very nature of these two partners has evolved. A regional grouping that was considered Team B is now a Team A in itself. You know, it's a role model. ASEAN model is a model in itself. And there are scholars who said that perhaps European Union should also follow the ASEAN model in arriving at particular decisions in conflict situations or in situations that are not very, that don't have much support of partner countries. And also some would argue that, European Union is dominated by the trifecta. Of course, the United Kingdom is now out, but France and Germany are the ones who rule the roost. That's not the case with ASEAN. So perhaps the European Union could also learn something from ASEAN, is also one of the arguments that is being presented. So that's the kind of canvas I would like to draw. That's that canvas on which I would further add my points in understanding, defining this relationship. If you look at the ASEAN, what are the defining features of ASEAN? The first and foremost, I think, is that these are countries which are very particular, very sensitive, very rigid to a certain extent. They are very rigid about their sovereignty issues. To them, if you say, okay, majority equality, and I'm sure our members of the audience and students are informed about the European Union. I know a number of very good scholars, prominent scholars. Some of my friends have already spoken on themes. So you know that majority qualified system in European Union defines everything. So which essentially means that out of 27 members, if 20 members agree to something, they don't bother about other 7. Now, that is a good thing in the European Union context, not in ASEAN, because these countries think, these 10 members of ASEAN think that if 7 of us are supporting something and 3 of them are not in favor, maybe those 7 are, they have their own hegemonic tendencies, they have their hegemonic designs, or they are working at the behest of some superpower. These are concerns that dominate the ASEAN narrative. So that's why a consensus-based system, each country having equal power. It's weird in some sense that even in terms of sponsoring, funding the secretariat, the ASEAN secretariat gets equal amount of funding from all member states. Imagine Laos contributing the same amount as Myanmar, as Malaysia or Singapore. So that's another unique thing about ASEAN. When we look at this relationship, when we compare it, and of course, there's something that perhaps you could keep in mind when you listen to other speakers, that these two regional groupings have different backgrounds. Where they come from is very important, right? Where you come from decides who you are, and who you are decides where you're going to go. I mean, I'm not talking about the constructivists here, but that's what defines ASEAN, right? And this, who you are and what is your history, shapes ASEAN-EU relationship. Another very important, perhaps very critical point about ASEAN-EU relationship is that we keep saying that, look, ASEAN wallas are always interested in money. You always want money from us. European Union, scholars and those who study European Union, they keep saying, even policymakers off the cuff, they keep saying that, look, you guys just want money, funding from us. What do you contribute in return? No relationship, no partnership is a one-way traffic, right? How can you always ask for money and funding, donations, capacity building, sustainable development, partnership, etc.? How can it be a one-way traffic? Now, here is the thing. Majority of these fundings and sponsorships and supporting programs are to rebuild that trust. Rebuild that trust in civil society amongst the masses that, look, European Union or European countries of 18th, 19th, 20th century were different. This is a different world. European Union is a different country. We have to look at things differently. European Union is not interested in superpower politics. Now, if you look at the narrative, past, I think 3-4 years have been very important in that sense. My good friend and senior Professor Harshpant has already talked about Indo-Pacific. And there you see a very distinct approach. European Union, like ASEAN, has been saying that, look, we are not even interested in superpower politics. Well, we have problems, and this is one of my arguments on EU's approach to Indo-Pacific, that, well, EU has problems with China and its certain actions, but those problems, those concerns are with the rules, with the practice of those policies, not with the act. American approach to the Indo-Pacific is about a particular actor. Let's have no doubt about it. European Union, like ASEAN, keeps saying that, well, we have to keep it open, prosperous, inclusive, and what you have. But in case of other countries, most of the countries, Australia included, this is about one particular actor. So both these regional groupings are norm abiding. For them, norms and rules are very important, right? And the normative power of both ASEAN and European Union shapes their relationship, shapes their outlook towards Indo-Pacific, which is the biggest thing in the international relations discussion at this point. Plus, also how they look at the superpower rivalry looming large over this part of the world. These are things that make them closer than any other country, any other partner. Of course, there are two exceptions, two Asian exceptions, India and Japan. Their approaches also align very closely with the ASEAN approach, with, of course, the European Union approach. But these two countries have, Japan, of course, has a troubled past, but India has always been like that. And that's why India's insistence on Indo-Pacific is something that capitals across the Quad countries also listen to. Quad is to a great extent been is getting milder and milder because of India's insistence. So the normative dimensions also define ASEAN-EU partnership. Now, if we look at the sort of more technical aspects, if you look at ASEAN's external relations, it is based on this idea. Now, I'm sure you know about the ASEAN history. It was created as a regional grouping at the height of the Cold War. The idea was to contain, if not contain, at least counter China. But countering China was not the only thing. Even at the peak of the Cold War, the ASEAN declaration says we are going to be a bunch of countries that develop friendly relations. We have to have 5 principles of peaceful coexistence. We'll engage everybody. No specific mention of China or communist regimes across the region or worldwide. So even at the peak of Cold War, it was very open, inclusive, based on mutually beneficial relationships, cooperation, and partnerships. And to do this, now, how is this important? How is ASEAN external relations important in understanding the nature of this regional grouping? They have what I call the concentric circles of relationship. So for ASEAN, it's a very Buddhist philosophy, if I may use the term, very Buddhist in nature. So for ASEAN, if you are a best friend, you are part of the East Asia Summit, or you are a full dialogue partner. If your interests and concerns align, let's say 6 out of 10, you are a sectoral dialogue partner. If the relationship is only in a certain segment, then you are a developmental partner, a special observer, guest, or some other category. So these concentric circles, China, for instance, was not there in any capacity till 1992. India, unfortunately, was also out of those spaces. But that doesn't mean that ASEAN was anti-India, right? So no enemies. The Indonesian foreign policy during Susilo Yudhoyono's time was named as foreign policy having 1,000 friends, 0 enemies. This is something that applies to ASEAN as well. ASEAN also practices this kind of approach. And that's why often we get baffled by how they deal with China, despite so many incursions and territorial incursions and cartographic incursions, etc. So this again is very important in understanding ASEAN's external relations. So even when we talk about European countries in the past, there's no animosity anymore. So that doesn't drive this relationship. That has not driven this relationship even 60s and 70s. No enemies, right? Neutrality. ASEAN's external relations, as I mentioned, are basically shaped by these concentric circles, dialogue partners, sectoral, developmental, special observer, guests, and other categories, whatever you have. If you look at the type of cooperation, you have political, security, economic, socio-cultural, functional, developmental. I'm sure you know about all this, so I'm going to skip the details. The cooperation framework, you have the +1 East Asia Summit. In economic domain, you have +3 RCEP, various FTAs. On the security front, ARF, ADMM+, and East Asia, the extended ASEAN Maritime Forum. This might sound repetitive, but this is linked to ASEAN, to the European Union. I'll tell you why at a later stage. So this basically is ASEAN's dialogue partnership, the list. If you look at the countries and the regional groupings, you notice that in 1974, you had Australia, and later you had New Zealand and Japan, which was the first actually informally, but 1997 they joined. So 1977 was the watershed moment in for ASEAN's external relations and in defining ASEAN's approach to other regions. And European Union at that time was the first regional grouping to be a dialogue partner of the ASEAN. So 1977. We have this year, 2022, we are celebrating 45 years of ASEAN-EU partnership. Now, I'm going to skip this in the interest of time because I've wasted 15 minutes of yours. So if you look at the evolution of ASEAN-EU relationship, we started in 1977. We had what is called as the ASEAN EEC, the European Economic Community at that time. The agreement was signed in 1980. We adopted the Nuremberg Declaration in 2007. Very important milestone because by that time, 2007, those who know about European Union evolution know that 2007 is when we can say that European Union, the European Union achieved its full moon, let's say, reached its peak. After that, we see post the Brexit happened and then moratorium on membership, etc. European Union today is facing a number of challenges, but 2007 was totally different. Then the agreement on Bandasari Plan of Action to strengthen the ASEAN-EU enhanced partnership was signed in 2012. The idea was to achieve a number of milestones by 2017, which was done. A number of agreements were signed at that during this period, and various levels of cooperation at in different domains were also kickstarted. In 2015, the EU and ASEAN called their partnership a partnership with a strategic purpose. Now, this is important because before this, even though strategic partnership ideas were not formalized, they started looking at this idea of making EU-ASEAN relationship more strategic. And this strategic is not in military defense sense, it is strategic in having a long view, right? Even today, EU and ASEAN are not talking about export and import of missile technology or aircraft carriers, bombs and guns and radars. They are not talking about that. They're talking about strategic in climate change. They are talking about strategic in environmental protection. They are talking about strategic in dealing with non-traditional security threats. And this is something that was further reiterated in the ASEAN EU Plan of Action 2018 to 2022. If you look at the joint statement, which came out of the 40th anniversary celebration between ASEAN and EU, the dialogue partnership, it also talks about challenges. Look at the last point, the ASEAN-EU statement on Paris Agreement, reaffirming commitment to cooperation to address the shared challenge of climate change. So this is what this relationship is. Even on strategic, they're talking about things that are strategic, maybe strategic for the human civilization, not a particular country or the national, regional defense security challenges. Couple of statements. Ambassador Response recently made a statement saying that the EU and ASEAN became strategic partners based on our shared values of effective multilateralism and rules-based international order. We have come so far as partner regions, having stepped up our relations to strategic economic, political development, and security cooperation. Now, Ambassador Igor is EU ambassador to ASEAN, who has been really leading these initiatives from the front. He's contributing a piece in my journal Next 2022 issue, and should be out in a month's time. And I'll be very happy to share that article with all of you, just to get to know how policymakers perceive this relationship and what are their plans about this relationship. If you look at the areas of cooperation within this broad spectrum of strategic partnership, it is sixfold. There are 6 pillars: development, political security, economic, green growth and environment, socio-cultural aspects, and bilateral relationships. Bilaterals are generally at different levels, like bilateral could be region to region as well. If you look at the political security cooperation, the essence is that this political security cooperation is confined to 2 things. One, there are dialogues happening, information sharing, understanding and making sense of best practices, learning from each other, becoming more aware of what your challenges in the neighborhood or in your environment are. And I thought most important was information sharing. And that information sharing is, of course, it's a 2-way traffic, but it also massively protects, supports the European Union countries, because they have big business interests in this part of the world, which is infested by maritime piracy, drug trafficking, gun running, and what have you. So these are, sorry. No COVID, I'm just allergic to dust, so don't get worried. So EU-ASEAN political security cooperation is basically confined to those aspects. It's still non-military in that sense. From the EU side, what ASEAN gets is capacity building initiatives, capacity building programs. They are good at certain things, and ASEAN acknowledges that. And this has also been like, not stereotyping it, but it's like the elder brother supporting building capacities of a younger one, and it's very friendly in that sense. It's not like dictating terms. The senior officials meeting in transnational crime, for instance, has been very effective. If you talk to people in CSF, the Southeast Asia Center on Counterterrorism Research, they'll tell you that these capacity building initiatives are not just confined to policymakers or practitioners or diplomats. It also spreads across to the academia, to those who are involved in track 1.5 initiative. Also the those who teach in the madrasas or other regional, other religious centers. So to make sure that people don't get influenced by radical thinking. So these transnational transnational crime consultation mechanisms and counterterrorism mechanisms have been very effective. On the economic front, I think there are a number of things that have happened over past few years. The FTA, unfortunately, is still pending, and I'm sure a lot has been discussed about it in the previous session. I thought you had Dr. Prakash to speak on that. If you talk about the EU-ASEAN FTA, very broadly, there is no interregional agreement. It is confined to a coalition of willing countries that are interested in having an FTA with the European Union. Singapore and Vietnam are already on board. And we are hoping that Indonesia and Philippines would join soon. Malaysia is also trying to make up its mind, let's say. More political stability in the country would perhaps lead to something like that. A more systematic dialogue. If you look at the trade, this is how trade has been growing. It has certainly been impressive. And the trend has certainly been encouraging. 2022, we had roughly 190 billion euros trade, which is remarkable. A number of countries, Germany, for instance, or Netherlands, are very important partners, investors, particularly in Malaysia. And even outside of European Union, there are a number of European countries that are European continent countries that have huge stakes in Malaysian economy. As you can see on the screen, the EU is ASEAN's third largest trading partner. It was in 2019. And ASEAN is the EU's also third largest trading partner outside of Europe. Yatharth, how much time do I have?
15 minutes more you have. How many slides are you like to?
You said 15?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Try and wrap it up by 5 so that we have enough time to Q&A.
Okay, all right, cool. Now, EU is the third largest source of FDI to the ASEAN, and EU has concluded a negotiation on free trade agreements FTA with Singapore and Vietnam, as I already mentioned. Indonesia and Philippines are in pipeline. In March 2017, the EU and ASEAN agreed to take new steps towards resuming talks for a region-to-region agreement. This was initially, I'm sure some of you are aware of this, that EU and China were mulling over the possibility of a free trade agreement. That failed. And after that, the European Union started looking for new partners. And in that list of new potential partners, inter-regional agreement with ASEAN also came up as a possibility. European Union is considering a possibility to sign FTA with India as well. Both ASEAN and India FTA negotiations were launched a few years back, but they failed because we could not arrive at a consensus. And that's why we had to stall it. Now we are restarting it. Now, the European Union is the fourth largest provider of external foreign direct investment in ASEAN. And this fourth, as you can see on the screen, sorry, it looks a bit stretched, but the EU has a 10% share in total FDI in ASEAN, which is really remarkable, because if you look at economists would tell you this better. Within the European Union, if you look at their intra-regional trade dynamics, some of their major players on the trade economic front are not even, they are not even interested in reaching out to countries in Asia. Italy, for instance, is one of the most prominent players in the European scene. But if you talk to them about FDI and stuff, they're not very keen. I mean, they have a role. Of course, it's a part of G7, but they're not that interested if you compare it with Germany, for instance. So in comparison, there are a number of European countries which are very strong within the continent, but they are not interested in reaching out to ASEAN or other countries. Of course, ease of doing business is also a major important factor, and ASEAN should perhaps consider strengthening their ease of doing business component. They should try and scale countries up on in that list. If you look at the FTA possibilities, well, there are a number of them. European Union really tried very hard to have FTAs, if not EU-ASEAN, inter-regional FTA, at least these bilateral FTAs. Some of these initiatives are really, these are baby steps, not FTA as per se, but some sort of arrangement, to facilitate trade. So with Myanmar, the investment protection agreement negotiation, which were launched in 2014. Currently, the situation in Myanmar is very precarious, and I am not sure that any of these agreements could go forward because European Union, being a normative power, is very particular about human rights situations. Likewise with Thailand, I mean, those negotiations were stalled post Prayut government. Prayut Chan-o-cha, the military general who took over the reins in Thailand, is currently sort of politically appointed leader of the government. But that event led to a premature stallation of FTA negotiations. We are hoping, if you talk to the European Union experts and policymakers, they would tell you that they are still hopeful that maybe these negotiations should be started again. I mean, ASEAN, after all, is very happy with what Thailand has done. I mean, they have no objections to it. No other country has. So, the European Union is still in a dilemma. I think the brighter side is mostly with countries on the right side of the screen: Vietnam, Philippines, Brunei. We're not sure. Nothing has started, so let's leave it there. So Vietnam and Philippines are. With Philippines, it's already signed 2018. With Vietnam, it's already signed. It was in 2018. With Philippines, there is a very strong possibility now. With Singapore, signed already in 2018. With Indonesia, very strong possibility. But Indonesia, as trade experts would tell you, is a very hard bargain. They're very much like India. They would bargain, negotiate on everything, and they try and bargain on everything because it's a huge market and it's an economy that's very inward looking, like India. So they don't really have to look out for new markets. They are interested in FTAs for more FDI. So inward investment and better quality products is something that they look for. And what they export is really something that is in surplus. So Indonesia is a tricky player there. If you look at the socio-cultural dimension, there is a lot, and I would argue that on that front, European Union is the biggest partner of the ASEAN, whether it is initiatives on gender equality and women empowerment, or migrant workers, or quality of education through scholarships, or higher education in ASEAN region, the SHARE program, the humanitarian assistance on disaster management funding. On almost everything, EU is a leading player, perhaps the most important partner for ASEAN in building capacities, in sharing expertise, in sharing knowledge, in sharing best practices, in making ASEAN countries understand the importance of sustainable development initiatives, the importance of COP21 and COP26, the importance of action on climate change. And that is something where European Union's normative perceptions differ from ASEAN's real life situations. So when the European Union imposes a ban on Malaysia and Singapore palm oil, of course, Malaysia and Indonesia get very worried and concerned about it. You can count Brunei in and Philippines in. They get very worried about it because they are palm oil exporting countries. But for the European Union, these are matters related to the health of the planet Earth, human civilization. So that's why there are concerns. There are rough patches in this relationship, and palm oil is one issue which is very important. You talk to the Malaysian Prime Minister or a common man in Malaysia, you talk to President Jokowi or a common man in Malaysia, a woman. In Indonesia, they'd say the same thing, that for them, palm oil is very important. That issue should be resolved amicably, and something that should give something, something in return to the affected countries. But all in all, socio-cultural cooperation is very important, and that is one front where ASEAN has done quite, European Union has done quite a lot. 3 new programs with total funding of 13 million euros, quite a lot of money. And look at these initiatives. First is Smart Green ASEAN Cities. Second, Regional ASEAN Forest Governance. Third, Supreme Audit Institutions. You'll see that in this partnership, where is European Union in this? You're spending 13 million euros to build smart green cities in ASEAN. You are working on ASEAN Forest Regional Governance. You are building audit institutions in ASEAN. What are you getting in return? European Union is playing a very long game here. They are looking at building capacities of ASEAN countries so that tomorrow situation gets better in terms of ease of doing business and engaging these countries better, so that EU-ASEAN trade or EU-ASEAN even people-to-people engagement, the labor mobility or talent mobility is also a possibility, because the social welfare schemes and social security schemes in European Union are totally different. I mean, there's a huge difference, massive qualitative difference between how social security is perceived in countries of ASEAN or even in India and how it is perceived in the European Union region. So they are building capacities to make sure that tomorrow their people, their private sector, the corporate is interested in investing in ASEAN. Their people or these companies are interested in establishing their hubs, and they don't want to go out of ASEAN or just confined to Singapore or a couple of places in the neighborhood, Taiwan, Hong Kong. So making sure that ASEAN is a habitable place, even for their corporate sector, so that private companies could also come and invest. And of course, this is not that, it's not just about business, it's also about this very nature of this, the very nature of this relationship. Sorry about that. Now, if you look at the priority areas, a number of them are here. What is very important is, unlike China or the US, Japan or Australia, you see that in this, the top 9 areas, you don't see anything on freedom of navigation, right? You don't see anything on military cooperation and building alliances and stuff like that. You have gender equality, people-to-people connectivity, natural disaster, poverty eradication, COVID-19 response. Even on COVID-19, European Union donated vaccines, and a lot of funding came in from the European Union to the ASEAN region. So even on that front, this partnership is very non-security, non-conventional security, how shall I put it? It's a relationship that is not confined to traditional security regions. In fact, it goes beyond traditional security cooperation. It doesn't even consider traditional security as an area of cooperation as a core area of cooperation. Now, if you look at the Indo-Pacific construct, I think much has been, I'm sure much has been already discussed. But here I thought the most important issues are twofold. One, ASEAN centrality is at the core of EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. You may say that there's nothing new about it, it's purely rhetorical in nature, but no. ASEAN centrality is important for the European Union for a totally different region. For the European Union, ASEAN centrality is important because they believe in multilateralism. They want, a sister regional organization to flourish, to remain at the center, so that, so that their idea of multilateral cooperation, regional cooperation is strengthened. European Union is very worried about how things have happened with the United Nations, with the WTO, and even with ASEAN. If you look at the statements that have been released over past 10 years, you notice that it's the European Union which has been most concerned about erosion of ASEAN centrality, or ASEAN taking hard-headed decisions on, issues of regional concern, whether it is Myanmar or Cambodia or a political coup in Thailand, South China Sea. They have taken a principled stand, always saying that, look, we are not worried about which country is encroaching into your territory. We are more worried about the fact that ASEAN is under threat. So that's very important. Second is EU's Indo-Pacific policy, EU's approach towards Indo-Pacific is in alignment with ASEAN on the second count. That EU is also, European Union is not interested in superpower rivalry. Anybody who tells you that the European Union is going to go anti-China is, I don't have the words, but that's not correct. That's the European Union is not interested in any sort of rivalry, military or otherwise, with China. They look at China as a systemic challenge because China has not been following the internationally accepted, universally accepted rules of engagement. Their concern is about the rules, about the order that was carefully drafted and protected by the Europeans, by the Western world. And that's why European Union was equally concerned about Donald Trump. They were equally worried with the way Donald Trump approached international politics and superpower relations. So in that sense, whatever ASEAN says, go by the book, go by the rule book, go by the norms and principles that are set, that are accepted by everybody, and make sure that whatever you have, your agenda is followed. So a very liberal, in political science terminology, a very liberal approach, not mercantilist, but very liberal, that we don't have to get into a war to extract our gains. We can do it even just with consultations, etc. So that's how it has been approached. Now, these are very quickly 7 priority areas in the Indo-Pacific region for the European Union. And this again is very much confined to non-traditional security domains. If you look at ASEAN's key priority areas, I guess I don't have to focus much on this. ASEAN is dealt with separately, but maritime cooperation, connectivities, SDGs, and economic and possible areas of cooperation. Connectivity is another very important initiative. This is a response to China's Belt and Road Initiative because European Union's, let me reiterate, European Union's concern is how China is translating its stated policy into action. So there again, they are worried about rules, and that's why they're trying to provide an alternative. And that's why the EU Connectivity Initiative has been termed as rules-based connectivity. And that's very important. Now, lastly, if you look at the challenges, I think the biggest challenge is if the European Union believes in ASEAN, it should deal with ASEAN as a region, as a unit, right? Not, don't deal with countries bilaterally. And FTA, I thought, was the biggest concern there. ASEAN is a different animal. ASEAN has a different history, and that's why some of the ASEANists don't like it when you go and engage Singapore and Vietnam and leave other countries behind. Of course, ASEAN is difficult to deal with, but that's something that that you have to bear if you are a normative power. So that is point number 1. Second, of course, is the palm oil issue. On the palm oil question, there have been certain implementation issues, and in countries like France and Germany, where rapeseed oil is used, while palm oil is banned, is something that ASEAN countries, particularly Malaysia and Indonesia, have not been able to understand. Why have you banned palm oil and you're okay with other kind of substitutes that are equally harmful to the environment? It's something that that must be discussed openly and debated. That's number 2. And I think the third one, the concern from European Union side, is let's make this relationship a two-way traffic, a two-way road where ASEAN also contributes. I think this is something that we have to perhaps discuss more and try and find new avenues of cooperation where ASEAN also acts as a contributor, as a country, as a region that has its own share in this relationship. So we need to, so the EU needs to pay more attention to ASEAN. What ASEAN is saying is also important, especially on the trade front, FTA front. Security cooperation, greater capacity building is important because now South China Sea issue is flaring up. I mean, it is a forever flaring up issue, but these days I thought it's getting worse with countries like, even countries like Malaysia getting affected by incursions. FTA bilateral and bilateralism versus multilateralism is a challenge. Palm oil again is very important. And lastly, we need to get out of this donor recipient relationship. This is my something that I've been saying for long, but I guess I'll keep saying this until ASEAN and EU change the nature of their relationship. And this is very important. If you talk to the EU experts based in Europe, they echo the same thing. So this is something on which the EU experts and policymakers, the practitioners, are also equally worried. I think I'll conclude by saying that these two regional groupings and ASEAN-EU relationship in the 21st century is a cliche term, but it's going to be a defined partnership. Because no matter how hard America and China try to push their security, military-centric agenda, it's cooperation that is going to lead. After what will happen after the war is a question that liberals ask the realists, and I'm going to ask the same question. Not that I'm a liberal, but this is a question worth pondering. What will happen after South China Sea is resolved? God forbid, militarily, but even otherwise. The answer is every post-war situation leads to cooperation. The very foundation of European Union, it tells us that. European Union was established on the ashes of Second World War, which was primarily a European continental war. It involved France, Germany, United Kingdom, also Russia, which unfortunately is, even though it is part of the European sphere, it is never included. It is always, if I can use this analogy from the Indian epic Mahabharata, Russia is always considered Karna in this great game, which is unfortunate for Russia. But the European Union evolution tells us that war is never a solution, and you have to talk things out. You have to find a way out, and that's where the key to prosperity and stability lies. And that's why I believe that even for ASEAN, even though there are a number of challenges for ASEAN at the regional level, there are a number of security anxieties and uncertainties at the Indo-Pacific level. The superpower rivalry involving the US and China is looming large, and I believe every country is worried about it, including America and China. But amidst all of this, EU-ASEAN relationship offers a ray of hope that perhaps multilateralism, treating everybody as equal and engaging in a dialogue process, is the way out to advance cooperation and build a cooperative mechanism. I'll stop there. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rahul. It was a very detailed and informative lecture. The floor is now open for question and answer. Please raise your hand, unmute yourself and speak. You can also post your question into the chat box. Already a few hands there. Sir, we'll take a few questions together and then you can respond. We'll take 2 or 3. We'll club it. Will that be okay with you? Or you want to go one?
Yeah, sure. Okay. I think we could club the questions together.
All right. So Anand, Priya, Rishabh, let's go in that order.
I'll let Priya ma'am ask a question first.
All right.
Go ahead, please. First come first.
All right. So thank you, sir, for this very intuitive lecture. Since towards the end of the session, we did discuss a bit about how the politics in the South China Sea is working on. I just wanted to know your opinion. Like, for example, in the United Nations, we have members of the EU, such as France, for example, or maybe even Germany, for example, which have a very, strong stand on, let's say, following the norms, the international norms and the international rules and orders. Like, for example, we know for a fact that China has, on numerous accounts, flouted international norms, flouted international rules. And even when we look at the South China Sea issue, it has pretty much gone against the verdict given by the tribunal in the issue of China versus Philippines, or rather its behavior continues to be so. So I just wanted to know, why is EU as a whole, sort of hesitant to take up a stand which can look more like corrective retribution in a way, or rather, if not retribution, maybe, let's say something along the lines of maybe taking up sanctions in a way and putting forward or putting some sort of pressure on the international front to other nations, maybe such as India or the ASEAN or other nations or its partners, to take up, or rather put in some sort of pressure so as to make China realize that, okay, we have reached the limit. Maybe it's better that you start observing and following the international norms and orders. I mean, I know it sounds a bit immature in that sense, but yeah, that's what I had.
All right. Shall I go ahead? Yeah. Rahul, thank you very much for that excellent presentation on EU-ASEAN relations. I was just wondering, wanted to know from you, so there's obviously a growing interest of the European Union in the Indo-Pacific for sure. And how do you see ASEAN being an effective partner of the European Union in the Indo-Pacific? Because in your presentation, you also pointed out that security is something that is really out of the negotiation, entire EU-ASEAN negotiation itself. So how do you see EU-ASEAN being an effective partner together? Because if security is an out of question, and security is one of the main concerns in the Indo-Pacific. So, yeah.
Rishabh, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, ma'am. My question is related to the internal political stability of ASEAN. As we know that 3 days ago, Cambodian Prime Minister visited Myanmar, and I wanted to know how is that going to change the relationship within ASEAN, and how politically stable is ASEAN within itself?
So you can take these 3 questions and then we can go ahead after that.
Okay, thank you for those very powerful bunch of questions. I think it covers almost everything that I left in my presentation. Difficult questions, I must say. I'll start with Anand's question. Well, Anand, in understanding the role of European Union, we must also realize what kind of actor it is. European Union will never intervene in any issue that involves military conflict between China and its Southeast Asian neighbors. Because number one, EU doesn't have its collective, a collective army, a collective armed forces. They rely on NATO, which is for all practical purposes led by the US and has a very strong presence of other partners as well. So that's a factor there. And that's why this whole Macron versus Merkel, not versus, but Macron-Merkel debate on what should we do with NATO is very important. If you believe in what Macron says, then of course we should go and have the Europeans, of course, should go and have their own armed forces, and then they are your security providers. They will not hesitate in doing that. And so at this stage, there are logistic, concerns related to logistics. They don't have a representative on the defense military front, which could deal with all these challenges. NATO is the only possibility, and NATO wouldn't do that. Number two, for these 60, 70 years, the idea largely dominated by the Germans is that the European Union will not participate, will not play any active role in any military conflict whatsoever. Look at the history, the world history. European Union never initiated, and even any, the popular examples, NATO missions in Kabul and Baghdad, led by the US. So they have kept their books very clean. European Union can always stand up and say that, look, we never even intervened. We did it at the behest of NATO Secretariat. We did it when the Americans requested us. We did it when other powers, even France and Germany, France and Britain asked us to do it, right? So that's very important. Understand the role of this actor. Of course, when you give them this power, maybe they'll play it differently. But that said, individually, European countries have always been present in this part of the world. So even in South China Sea, you have, what they do is they don't conduct freedom of navigation operations like the Americans do. What they do is they train naval forces of Southeast Asian countries, particularly Indonesia, particularly Singapore and Malaysia, and nowadays Indonesia. Philippines has been a great partner. So individually, European countries have been supporting them in dealing with the South China Sea challenge. I think at a later stage, when things go worse, maybe European Union could play a more important role, but even that role will be confined to diplomacy and diplomatic actions. So European Union has to change itself to change its role in South China Sea is my short summary of my response. To Priya's brilliant question, EU could play a role, and EU as a security partner is, of course, this is related to what Anand asked. This ASEAN's concerns are important. I would say that South China Sea politics, of course, now we can include India into this, difficult situation, but Southeast Asia, let's call it Southeast Asia and South Asia. Partly, nobody's worried about Japan because Japan can handle its situation very well, and Taiwan is purely a US-China-Taiwan equation, a trilateral. But Southeast Asia and South Asia define the superpower politics at this moment. We are unfortunately at the ground zero of superpower politics. So whatever happens in this region is very important. EU as a security provider or security partner is important. These security considerations are important. But look, I think I gave this example to in some other context, in the context of India's Look-East policy, Act-East policy. But I'm sure this applies to the European Union as well. It's like, I love Delhi. I have lived there for a number of years, so nothing against any particular city, Delhi or Mumbai. But it's like if there is a girl who is walking on the roads of Delhi in the middle of the night, and she has her Uber or Ola, whatever you have these days, driver drops her at the nearest shop, and she has to walk 500 meters to her home, and she has no company. And while going to her house, she sees a cop who is a drunkard, looks like a drunkard. He is drunk, apparently, and looks very unruly. That's scenario number one. Now she is looking for a somebody who could help her reach her house. Number two is a guy who is very good, but a local bully. She is desperate. She could perhaps ask him for help, but that's scenario number two. Number three, she on her way back, she sees another girl who's equally worried, concerned. These ladies don't know each other, and they are totally unsure. Out of these three scenarios, which one do you think is most feasible? Based on what I know, I think the third scenario is most feasible, in the sense that if you are unsure, if you are weak, if not weak in that sense, if you're not sure about your environment, if you are physically in the context of international politics, if you are militarily weak, if you are strategically vulnerable, if you don't know about your environment, you will always choose your partners who are, you will always choose those who are worried, weak, vulnerable as your partners, because dialogue can also be a way to strengthen security. So security through dialogue is a very important mechanism. It's a very important contributing factor, rather than, and this is what shapes ASEAN's overall approach. ASEAN is always, they are always hesitant in dealing with this unruly cop, America, which is drunk in power. I mean, America at what? Look at the VFA, the military agreement between America and Philippines. The policymakers would tell you that Duterte was just a symptom. I mean, he's a politician. He knows how to play things up, but there were genuine concerns that Americans have been really not treating the Filipino armed forces very well, and that's why VFA had cracks. He just utilized those to his political advantages. That's point number one. So in Southeast Asia, countries are worried that America wants to have its own way of doing things, and they are bullies. I have no doubts about it. Talk to Thailand, and they would give you share the same experience, a similar experience, and same grievances. How they've been bullied. The other possibility is a local bully, China. Your security cannot be achieved by engaging with them. ASEAN COC and DOC are biggest example, Code of Conduct on South China Sea, or the declaration on the binding and non-binding. So EU as a security partner is important because they help you with a number of other things. They are still in the background. They are still behind the scene, but they've been trying to strengthen ASEAN's positions in a number of ways. I think recent developments on Xinjiang and how and European Union's concerns on human rights violations are directly related to China Southeast Asia relations as well. So it's not that EU is not taking action. EU is taking measured action. They are working with ASEAN, trying to understand what are ASEAN's concerns. Both of them, since both of them don't have their standing armies, they cannot really get into a bilateral or an inter-regional MOU, and that's a constraint. We have to understand that. But beyond that, I think security through dialogue is something that is already happening. Post-strategic partnership 2020, we are now celebrating the first year of relationship. This security partnership has opened new avenues. Now, European Union works as a coalition of willing on these issues. So what EU has started doing, and there are very clear signs, what EU has started doing is there is an unofficial sort of advisory that, look, if you are interested in playing a bigger role in Southeast Asia or South China Sea, please go ahead and do that. So 3 leading countries, Germany, France, and Netherlands, are very much in South China Sea. And they are, even though they are not saying freedom of navigation operation, their ships are there. They have been past, I think, 3-4 months. There have been several such visits. So bilaterally, this is happening. Unfortunately, regional grouping is still a bit early. One last to Priya's point. Also, the fact that both European Union and Southeast Asian countries individually, there is a lot that happens behind the doors, and we have no access to that. We are not privy to that. Is also something that policymakers will tell you. So when you criticize them, when you criticize the European Union for not doing enough, they say, dude, you don't know enough. So I think that's also something that we have to perhaps take into account and maybe wait for another 10 years. So whenever they declassify these documents, we'll get to know how much of capacity building and how much of support is coming from the European Union side. Certainly not open and overt military support, but covert operations and covert support, logistic support is a possibility. I don't deny that. Finally, to Rishabh's questions on Hun Sen. Hun Sen is on his way out to do things, normalized relationship with Myanmar. Nobody can stop it. Let's be very honest. honest about it. We cannot change it because unfortunately, this is how ASEAN has been designed. Even though ASEAN is consensus-based, but the ASEAN chair has that power to decide what he wants or what that country wants, right? So in this case, Hun Sen, if he has decided that Myanmar junta is doing good and Min Aung Hlaing is the right guy to engage with, nobody can question that. So ASEAN chair has become, over past 5-6 years, has become very authoritative in nature, right? So democratic and consensus-based element is eroding very, very rapidly. And that is a cause of concern for us. If you look at the way special envoy on Myanmar was appointed, special envoy to the ASEAN Secretary General was appointed, it was also not very democratic. Brunei was the chair at that time, and they chose the Brunei guy as their envoy, even though there were representations from Indonesia and Malaysia. So we have to live with that. There is no way out, unfortunately.
Sir, we'll take one last round of questions before we wrap up. I request the participants to be very brief with their questions. Before we go to Hitesh and then Rishabh, there's a question in the chat box which I would like to read. It's from Abhishek Tripathi, and he's asking, can successful EU-ASEAN relations has some case study or strategies for Indo-EU relations, especially in higher education field? Higher education and collaboration. Hitesh, you would like to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just keep it short. Following up from the answer you gave to Anand, Ms. Anand. So if about the whole uprising of military if there is a possibility of EU rising up with military, and since they are planning, there had been a Reuters report where on 9th of November 2020 there was a document where there was a EU rapid deployment capacity was discussed about forces in 3 different domains: air, land, and water. So rising of this kind of military, won't this rise the this philosophy of Reza Dehat, and this will halt the philosophy on which EU works, that is of borderless state and about human rights, gender equality, because history had been an example. The rise of hard power capacity has always has its reactions. So
Rishabh, please go ahead.
Yes, so I actually wanted to know how does actually the Quad view the how does actually ASEAN view the Quad and the workers actually? Will it actually work to the detriment of actually ASEAN or actually work to its stability? I just wanted to know this. Could you please answer?
So you may go ahead with these questions. After these questions, we'll wrap up the session.
Okay, thank you. Very good questions and very important issues. To Abhishek's questions on education cooperation, a number of initiatives have already been taken. And I think the biggest example there is, biggest live example, I would say, is this talk, the John Monnet Center of Excellence. This comes with the EU funding. 2 countries, 2 partner countries, mostly in this part of the world. And both South and Southeast Asia have been big beneficiaries. The idea is to promote European Union studies, but not just European Union studies, ASEAN EU cooperation, or in this case, ASEAN EU India cooperation through education channels. EU initiatives on the educational front, SHARE, for example, is one. You have another very important multilateral grouping, inter-regional grouping, ASEM, Asia-Europe meeting. My institute, the Asia-Europe Institute, is a product of the ASEM cooperation, which involves 50 plus countries from Europe and Asia. So there again, European Union is an important partner. The ASEAN education process is the leading front for educational cooperation between these two continents. But if you talk specifically about ASEAN EU, on higher education, there are a number of initiatives, scholarships are there, fellowship programs are there, capacity building, a number of capacity building initiatives are there. I'm sure you must have heard about Erasmus Mundus scholarship and Erasmus Plus program. Capacity building, another very important initiative is the Brazil initiative, which is for least developing countries. My institute was fortunate to have the Brazil, fortunate to be the Brazil center as well in first in Southeast Asia. We use that channel to build capacities in Laos and Vietnam. So on the higher education front, there is a number, that is the number of things that have been done. The second question was by Hitesh, right? Hitesh, your question was, well, I don't know how to respond to that question. It's not that EU has been sending wrong signals. It's not that things are going to change drastically, even though policies and intentions have been recently expressed. All in all, my assessment is that the European Union is going to stick to what it has been saying and practicing in the past. EU is going to, on the defense strategic, on the defense and military front, European Union, that is the European Union, which is which is run, coordinated by Brussels, is not going to play a direct role. They're going to stay there, wait for others to intervene, wait for others to take the lead, and this is how it is going to be for some more time. The European Union will keep pitching for this normative role, for normative component. You can call it a shield, but that's how it is going to be. So no massive change in European Union's role or its role conception. Rhetorical aspects are something that we can keep on talking about. Number of these patches of initiatives are also something that will keep happening. And these patches of initiatives are actually a symptom, it is a manifestation of this transition that is about to take place. This transition will, it's a long-term process, right? You define, you conceptualize your role. So role conception and role defining will then translate into action. This process is going to take at least, I don't know, if I'm very ambitious, I'll say 5. If I'm realistic, I'll say 10 years. So not before that, unless of course there's something, something dramatic happens. The last question was, sorry, I missed that question.
Sir, actually, I was asking that how does ASEAN view the Quad and
sorry,
AUKUS?
Rishabh, I got that question. Yes, on AUKUS and Quad.
Yes, sir. How it views it, whether it will actually act to its benefit or to its losses in the Indo-Pacific. ASEAN, actually, sir.
Okay, so if you look at, I'll quickly brief you on both. On Quad, European Union is not concerned because this is not their problem, right? They are not a security provider. They don't want to be a security provider, so better ends there for them. If there is a new minilateral mechanism that can safeguard the rules-based order in the region, they'll welcome that, and that's what they've done. On AUKUS, they are clearly, visibly offended because there's something agreed. There was between France and Australia, and those terms of agreement were really not regarded. They were not honored, and that's why European Union is concerned, offended. They have taken it to their pride. French particularly have taken it to their self-respect and pride, and the way things are, I think Australians are going to pay a huge price for that, and so are the Brits. If you talk about ASEAN, ASEAN is also, like European Union, they are also okay with this idea of a new mechanism which is on its own volunteering to become a security provider in the region for a rules-based order. So they welcome that. There's some countries which are closer to China. They of course are worried. They don't want a superpower rivalry to creep in. But with India and Japan in Quad, ASEAN is also opening up to this very slowly and gradually. They are opening up to this idea of Quad, and they are saying that, okay, maybe if you don't talk about nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers, maybe we can. If it is about dialogue, then maybe we can discuss it. So India and Japan are taking the lead, and that's a good thing. So AUKUS in that sense is a good news for Quad as well. AUKUS certainly created a lot of concerns and anxieties in ASEAN, and clearly because they, as I said in the beginning, your history defines who you are, and who you are defines how you respond to situations. In this case, superpower rivalry is something that they would not like, and they would certainly not appreciate. So AUKUS was not welcome, and we know that.
Sir,
both
history and geography, actually, only rather than taking the historical forces, taking geography also into concern would be very important here, I suppose.
Geography into consideration.
Yes, sir. I think so.
Well, yeah, geography is well, that is a factor that shapes your foreign policy. But superpowers, major powers transcend geographic limitations. America is the biggest example, but so is Japan. So is Russia. Major powers transcend boundaries, transcend regional and continental boundaries. That's what makes them superpowers. So when it comes to this superpower competition or major power competition, we should not confine ourselves to regional boundaries or geographic limitations. Unfortunately, we are the theater now, the center stage of this politics, and that's why Quad and AUKUS, and we don't know how many other initiatives will come up. But this is something that is bound to happen. I am sure in next 5 to 10 years, we're going to have at least half a dozen new initiatives, and pretty quickly. So let's not get fixated with Quad or AUKUS. There are going to be several more initiatives, and I'm sure with Southeast Asian partners as well. So geography, even though it is a factor, but not very much a factor in superpower politics. And AUKUS and Quad are directly linked to superpower politics. Quad more, and AUKUS, of course, because it involves the US, not any other factor. Okay, over to you, Dr.
Thank you so much, sir. With this, we have come to the end of this day 3. It has been a very, very long day for our winter school participants. Let me take this opportunity to thank Dr. Rahul Mishra for taking his valuable time with us and for sharing his inputs. It was a very enriching experience for all of us. Thank you so much, sir. Very quick announcement to our winter school participants. Tomorrow we will begin day 4 with a very, very important topic which concerns all of us. It's climate change, and that as you have received our schedule, the first session is titled as Politics of Climate Change in EU-Asia Relations. The session will begin at 12 p.m. IST. I request all of you to join in at least 10 minutes prior to the scheduled time. That's it from day 3 and from our side. Have a very nice evening. See you tomorrow, all of you. Thank you, Dr. Rahul. Thank you very much.
Rahul, thank you so much for being here, for accepting the invitation and being here.
Thank you, Dr. Yatharth and Dr. Priya, for this wonderful opportunity. I really thoroughly enjoyed discussing issues with the members of the audience and with both of you. Thank you so much. Really an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. Bye. Have a nice day.
Bye,
people.
You too.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day.
Thank you.